Welcome, everybody, to episode 127 of Axioms on Trial. Today we'll be discussing issues of gender and a lot of the talking points that I often am subjected to by conservatives and people on the other side. And I'll be bringing in Artemis and Ava to discuss these topics. And of course, as always, if you guys in the audience have any questions for me or for the guests, please leave them in the comments and we'll be addressing them throughout the show. So welcome. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I guess let's start off. Let's get right into it. One of the things that I often hear when engaging in these conversations with people is the idea that trans is a part of an ideology, or that it is a fad, a modern thing that has only happened in the last few years, and that it's just people trying to play with language, and that actually sex and gender are not different; they're the same thing. What would you both respond to that kind of claim? And Ava, if you can go first, and then Artemis. I don't know how you want to do it, but
well, I would say that science shows us that gender and sex are not the same. Every scientific organization, every psychological organization in the world agrees that sex and gender are distinct. I would also say that gender is psychosocially constructed. And in the same way, I would say that the sex binary is also psychosocially constructed in a way. But in response to like people who say that this is becoming a fad, or that more people are coming out as trans now, the reason why like it seems like there are a lot of trans people coming out is because people are feeling safer, right? People are feeling more like they're feeling more comfortable with coming out because it's becoming more accepted in society, right? And we can look back to when left-handedness was stigmatized, right? Whenever it stopped being stigmatized, it wasn't that more people started becoming left-handed. It's just that the left-handed people were no longer like super afraid to come out as left-handed. And like the same applies to like people who are in these various marginalized communities like the LGBTQIA+. They like feel more the trans community, certain trans people feel more comfortable coming out because it's becoming more accepted in society, not because more people are becoming trans.
right.
So,
Artemis, I want to hear, because I know you have a science background. What is it that the people that make those kind of claims are getting wrong about sex and gender? Maybe you can define these terms for the audience for us.
Yeah, I mean, we could go with dictionary definitions to define them, but I think what has happened, and a lot of people don't understand, is that colloquial usage of words is kind of why this issue has kind of arisen. And also the fact that for a long period of time, we didn't necessarily have all of the tools or even the advancements in technology to understand gamete production, what DNA was, or even like sex determination. And things like that. And so they were intermingled for quite a long period of time because we simply didn't have the knowledge. And I think we can all agree that when we learn new things, that we should move forward with that knowledge and not revert backwards. I mean, if we were going to revert backwards, we might as well put all women back in, asylums because we're too hysterical because we told our husband no. Like that, if we want to go backwards, that's where we're going. And so I would say that I ascribe sex as being other denoting to the sex that can produce large or small gametes and or produce offspring. And other denoting means relating to, because, and I try to stress this a lot, is that not every single individual is going to be male or female, and I would say the distribution factor be intersex the same way. And I think that we will have typical that we will see, but like to sit here and go, every single person is going to, who is male, is going to display all of these characteristics. It's just simply not true. And I think it's really important to highlight all the differences that we look at when talking about sex. And those are interesting conversations and they get complex. But gender, on the other hand, I look at gender and I say it's biopsychosocial, and I'll explain why. Because the biological component of our neurology is the only thing we could look at as to where gender is coming from. Because I don't see how gender can exist without society. And we can run a hypothetical later that I've kind of come up with to display this. But where that identity arises, and we noticed at least one section is the hypothalamus, but we are noting other pathways as we're going forward with mosaic brain, which is very new and a really complex, is that now we get into the psycho, which is going to be the inner self, the innate sense of self, and how one can identify who they are in society. A lot of people like to say it's a feeling. That would be like saying, I feel like a woman. And a good friend of mine on TikTok says the only person who ever knows how to feel like a woman is Shania Twain. No one feels like a woman. No one feels like a man. No one feels like their gender. They just are. And that's an innate sense of self. And then how that innate sense of self is expressed is going to be on the social aspect of the overarching category of gender, which is going to be dependent upon culture and society. And so I think what I run into a lot is people want it to be super simple. And yeah, I like simple things too. 2 + 2 = 4. But when we get into talking about us as humans and our complex social structures and our complex biology, it isn't just a simple, this is this, this is this, this is this. There are typicals, but not everybody's the typical.
When I think of the notion of gender, the way that it makes sense to me is to think about it as one's relationship to one's sex and sexual characteristics. So if you have an incongruence with that, then you could be labeled as trans. If you have an alignment with those things, then you would be labeled as cis. So it's your experience, your internal experience of your sex. Yeah, I guess the other thing I wanted to know from the scientific part of it was, what are these characteristics that make it not a binary, but make it a spectrum? I think I would be interested in that.
Yeah, so we could just there's 5 we could touch on. I'm going to leave out the 5th category of neurology because I think that is an advancing field, and we have pieces, but we don't have it as kind of defined as we do with the other 4. So we've got sex chromosomes, we've got gametes, and then we've got primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics. Hormones are going to fall under the secondary. So we look at sex, we look at chromosomes. I believe we're at 16 different karyotype expressions that we have been able to identify. And people go like, oh, we'll leave intersex out of the discussion. There's around, what we know right now, there's around 2% intersex people in the population. Now that is only like that. I think that is scratching the surface, because these are going to be people who outwardly display, or people who have run into issues either on like a fertility basis, or might be having some health issues on the way, and they get karyotyped and they find out. I think there's a higher number of intersex people, because out of 8 billion people, I just feel like there's going to be more, but I cannot say that for certain. It just seems like the probability of it. When it comes to all those different variations, they're still just X and Y. So that I would say is going to be bimodal. And then I would say binary. Yet within that 0 and 1, you have such a vast distribution. So I think it's like I said, people want to make it super simple. 0, 1, it's one or the other, but we know it's not. Yes, there's about as many intersex people as there are redheads. Intersex is actually pretty common if we want to think about it. And we don't say redheads aren't important to the conversation. We don't do that. And also, there's about maybe 1% more transgender people in the world than there are intersex. So these are all small percentages we're talking about too. Mm-hmm. So that's how we look at the chromosomes, and a lot of people just stop there. But gametes is how mainly we focus, because that's the one we can say is binary. I say except when we get into the topic of, well, if somebody is born with no gametes, or someone is born with both. And people mistaken when I say born with both as meaning someone that could reproduce with themselves. I'm not going to use the terminology because that's not something we see in humans, but that's what they think I mean by that. What I mean by that is that you could produce both, but only one be fertile. Like you could produce eggs and sperm, but your sperm could not work essentially, or the vice versa. And that's something I think that people don't necessarily think about. So when we get into the nitty gritty of that, then it's like, yeah, it's mostly binary, but there's a few rare exceptions. And then we get into primary and secondary sex characteristics, which are going to be, primary is going to come from the chromosomes, secondary is going to come from hormones, and it just kind of gets all muddied. We see the typical, but we know that there's it, like I say, male, female, and then you have a valley. Like these are the mountains, this is the valley, and then you have all of the people who fit within the non-typical.
Right.
So that's where the bimodal distribution comes from. It's not looking at one component, it's looking at all of them together and recognizing that there's variation amongst all of them.
Sure. Question for you, Ava. What is a kind of one of the most common accusations that has been thrown at you?
Oh, sorry, Cease, hold on. I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. What is one of the most common accusations that has been thrown at you during this kind of conversations that we tend to engage in with people on TikTok? There's a lot of transphobia that I see on there. What are some of the talking points that you find to be the most frustrating?
Well, some of the talking. Are you asking me like what are some of the talking points that transphobes have made? That
Yeah.
Okay, well, where do I start? Dang.
I know, right?
Where
There's
do
a
I
lot.
start? Trans people are just coming after children. They're just trying to trans your kids. That they're actually pedophile. I can say pedophile, yeah. They're actually pedophiles. I forgot when they're on TikTok. um, uh, a woman is someone with XX chromosomes. Like, there's no exceptions at all. A woman is someone who can give birth. There's no exceptions at all. Or things like that. They're all frustrating in their own special ways.
Sure. I'm assuming that when it comes to
Mike,
language. Oh, I'm assuming that when it comes to language, we're all in agreement that the same word can have multiple concepts behind it. So, when conservatives ask, what is a woman? Like they think it's some gotcha moment. It's like, we can talk about that term in the context of sex, and then we can talk
right?
about it in the context of gender. And the two terms are not in opposition. They're not in conflict. And I don't know why, when we all use language every day and know that we can use language that way, when it comes to gender, all of a sudden there's this belief that language should be this completely strict thing where words can only have one meaning in one context, and that anything else is like a modern. The separation between sex and gender as a concept has existed for millennia. It's not. This isn't a modern thing. Going all the way back to the ancient Egyptians and probably farther back than that, we saw a difference there. And yeah, I never understand why people are so obsessed with language having to never change.
Right. They're seeking. They're wanting like this like strict like this strict definition that places like these like firm boundaries on these terms, right?
Yeah.
But like that's not the case for like we don't do that for like anything else.
Right. I think one thing I want to also push back against is the idea that like trans people are claiming to have the exact same experience as cis people, when really what we're saying with something like womanhood or manhood, that it's not just biological. There are other aspects of those things that are also psychosocial. And so, I'm sure you agree, Ava, that like you as a trans woman, you're not claiming to have the exact same experience of a cis woman. You're just saying there is an overlap, right? You're still muted. You're still muted.
Oops. Anyway, there's an overlap, sure. There's a resemblance relation. So like no, I don't think any one woman has the same experience of womanness as another woman. I don't think that's possible. given that like every woman's like particular identity is going to be distinct from other women. Like the way that I experience my womanhood is going to be different from how Artemis experiences.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
or just any particular woman, like you meet on the street, or I'll meet on the street, right? And that woman's experience is going to be vastly is going to be particular from uh another woman that
Yeah.
she encounters, right, in her daily life. Um, so like to me that shows that like the sense of gender, like this gender identity that we have, um, like that a particular person has and another particular person has, what that shows me is that it's not some universal thing. Like at least that's the view I'm leaning towards. Like gender is not this universal thing that's instantiated by multiple particular paradigms. Rather, everyone has their own particular like gender identity, right? Every woman has her own womanness. There are many womannesses, and each that are instantiated by like each particular person, right?
Mhm.
And I think that um that the resemblance is like the metaphysical glue that unifies like all of these particular paradigms into the class that we call woman.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Question for you, Artemis. What do you make of the accusation that trans women are invading women's spaces and that it is misogynistic for people like myself to argue for inclusivity? I often hear this argument that uh, you know, if, for example, the whole bathroom conversation, right? That somehow we people like myself are supporting something that would endanger cis women, um, and that this is just nothing but males trying to enter women's spaces, um, and uh, have their way. Um,
I always find so first of all, so like women's spaces, I think what people have the misunderstanding of is that this was done for safety. And I talk about this quite a lot, that if you actually look into the history of separated bathrooms, I'm not talking about like showers or anything like that. I'm talking about just restrooms, toilet, sink, stalls. It came out of France in the late, like mid 1800s, and then late 1800s, early 1900s, America adopted this. And it more had to do with the fact that since some women were entering the workforce, now we have to remember this was an issue of class, and race did come into play with this because, um, a lot of white women were not really in the workforce. It had to do with class, it had to do with race. But for people who were using these restrooms, if there were women out and about, that they were basically saying, well, you need to remember that you need to be at home. Like, don't get yourself like too high and mighty. Here's a space to make sure that you have a place to rest. Because you're dainty, you're weak, we don't want you to be overwhelmed. And so it was a reminder of the home, and it was never about safety. And because if it was about safety, and I also point this out, then in the United States Senate, there would have been a women's restroom on the floor of the Senate before 1992. That was only about 32 years ago. That's wild to me. I am about to be 31. It's wild to me that there wasn't even a woman's restroom on the same floor. And I've had people even go like, well, was there one in the building? And I'm like, I thought it was about safety. I thought it was about making sure she had a place to go where she didn't have to go a huge distance to go to the bathroom. And so, but like also what I want to bring about the bathrooms is that this is not the first time that bathrooms have been a source of controversy. And I'm going to stay away from race, but I do want to remind people that gay men were extremely oppressed during the 50s in America, to the point to where there were films made. You can look this up. It was a 1955 educational film called Boys Beware. And it was a warns against the dangers of homosexuality, and it described it as a sickness of the mind. It was produced, it's 10 minutes long, produced by the Unified School District and the Police Department of Inglewood, California. This film was to warn children of cruisers in the male restroom because, unfortunately, due to homosexuality not being accepted or even able to be out and accepted in most places in America at the time in the 50s, gay men would meet each other up at the restrooms. But people have always used children as a virtue signal. It's always about the children. It's never been about the children. It's about adults and their uncomfortability. The film was made to as propaganda to children that you need to beware because a gay man might try to pick you up in the restroom. It's completely false. It was ridiculous. But people ate this crap up because they believed that homosexuals were predatory. So this narrative is not new. That painting trans people as predatory, it's not new. But just because now we know it's not new, we also know the evidence behind it is ridiculous. If you look up any places that talk about protection of women's spaces, like domestic violence organizations, or even organizations that highlight violence against women, you will see that they have articles on the fact that the myth about the bathroom and the transgender person who's a predator it's a myth. It's propaganda. You are fine sharing a restroom with a transgender woman. A sign on the door is not going to stop a predator from coming in there and doing anything. Transgender people are not allowing more predators into the bathroom. And I believe that a person has a right to use the bathroom that they feel safest in. And that goes with comfortability, but safety is my number one priority. And that's what really frustrates me a lot is it's like I have cis women get mad at me for saying these things. And they're like, how dare you not protect our space? I'm like, because trans women are women to me. That is also their space. And so I think there's a lack of like understanding. And like, I don't know what it's like to be trans, but I could certainly imagine what it would feel like to not know which bathroom I can freaking pee in. Because am I too feminine to use the men's restroom? Or am I too masculine to use the woman's? Where do I go? What do I do? And putting myself in that position, and I'm like, I just need to pee. I just need to go to the bathroom. I can't imagine what that feels like. And I want us to move past this ridiculous talking point of which bathroom should I use, because you're not asking people. We're not doing genital checks. And I think that it's just, and when people talk about locker rooms, I think we need more privacy in the locker rooms. I don't know why we advocate for changing in front of everybody. It's weird. We should advocate for more private spaces and privacy of changing rooms. I think these are things that we can work towards, but we have to get past this internalized issue and fear of the unknown. If people would sit down and listen to trans people talk about their experiences and who they are as people, I think people would realize that there's no predator here. There are bad people, but you can't paint a whole community as being bad people, because I'm going to say this, if we're going to do the whole, well, predators can go in the bathroom and we know it's cis heterosexual men, then you're giving me it's all men until it's no men. So either you agree with that and we stop that, or you don't agree with that and you're a hypocrite.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that I think one of the talking points from a lot of the TERFs that I've encountered is that ultimately it's about males, that they view males as inherently violent and dangerous and predatory. And so they might say, well, it's not even so much for me about, it's not a trans issue. It's an issue that trans women are still ultimately male and have grown up into a culture that makes them more dangerous. And in my perspective is there are places in the world where there are unisex bathrooms and enough safety measures installed that we don't see these situations of people being assaulted in these spaces. I mean, to some degree, there's always going to be a danger of, or a degree of danger in public spaces, just the reality there. But I don't think keeping trans women out of the bathrooms is what is going to reduce that danger. There are other ways that can actually navigate that far better, that don't involve targeting a group of people.
Right. Like, can I comment on that, on something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding like the trans bathroom debate. The opposition obviously argues that you should go to the restroom that corresponds to like your biological sex, right? So that means like for them, like for on their view, trans women like they need to use the men's restroom, trans men need to use the women's restroom. Um, so like putting aside like the typical like we'll bring up like Buck Angel or someone like and ask them like would you want someone looking who looks like this to go into the women's restroom? So the problem that they don't see that they never seem to recognize or they fail to recognize is that if you make it so that um trans men have to use the women's restroom, then cisgender men can just
Right.
claim to be trans men and then use that as an excuse to go into the women's restroom, according to their logic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that would lead to the same danger there as well.
right.
Yeah. That's a good point. I never thought of it about that. That's
I talk about that a lot as well. That then because people are like, oh, well, a man could put on a dress and lipstick and a wig and walk into the women's restroom. I'm like, why even put that effort into it? You can just walk in and say, I'm a trans man at this point.
yeah.
Like that's what you're forcing.
Right. That's actually a really brilliant point that I hadn't thought of before. And I guess along the kind of the same uh, concept, this idea that like trans people are invading sports and taking away opportunities. But one thing I've noticed is that the conversation never seems to be about trans men. It always seems to be about trans women, and that's something that I find curious. Why that is always the focus.
I can tell you why. I can
Please.
tell you why. It literally has to do. So it's part patriarchal and it's part misogynistic. It is this idea that a quote unquote man being too feminine is a direct threat to masculinity and to the hierarchy of men are these leaders, they're masculine, they're protectors, they're strong, all of these different things. It is this drive and this force, and like I talk about how toxic this is to men, that like you can't enjoy painting your nails. That's seen as girly. You can't enjoy getting your hair done or or getting a pedicure. Because these are girly and you shouldn't do these things. You're a man. And so I think that trans women get a huge bulk of this because it is seen as feminine men. Even though they are women, nobody even wants to get to that point because we can't get beyond this internalized notion of what a man has to be. Because we see masculine women and we're like, but there's also the notion, oh, they're just lesbian because they're masculine looking. That's also a stereotype. I think it has to do with the fact that there is this internalized belief of what a man should be, and when a man deviates, from that, it's just this hatred for that of like, because I'll always say this, trans women are treated like women by men. Men just don't realize they're doing it. They're doing the same thing that they do to cis women. They treat trans women like they're lower. They treat trans women like they need to be, they treat us the same way. And yeah.
How do I kind of ask the question? What effect do you think this should have on asymmetric laws, for example, military drafts or being shirtless in public?
Here's the thing, like I don't think we'll ever need a draft again. I think that everybody should be drafted. I don't think it should be one sex over another. Because I just think that we've moved past that. As for being shirtless in public, that's an interesting one. That is also an issue of over-sexualization of breasts that we can look at. Because, like, for instance, there's a lot of campaigns called Free the Nipple, which is because I think that mothers should be able to breastfeed in public. I hate it when people say, oh, they could just go into the bathroom. Would you eat your steak in the bathroom? Would you sit down at the toilet and like eat your steak? Like we don't recognize it like that's a child eating. And I mean in my state where I live, they're actually not a woman not wearing a shirt is not considered public indecency. Now, obviously, people are going to be upset, but there are places in my state where you can be nude and nobody questions it. I do think that it would be appropriate that we shouldn't that we should work on the over sexualization of the chest area, I would say that I think it would take a lot of time, but I don't think that we should label the chest as an ordinance of public indecency.
Right. Ava, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Oh, I don't have anything to add. I second everything Artemis said. I agree. Like, we have the same view.
So, I was going to say, yeah, so something that I find really mind-boggling to me is the amount of people that are so active in their own oppression. What TERFs don't realize is that when they say the things they say, they're reducing their own womanhood to just mere biology. They're saying that this is what makes me a woman and nothing else, that all I am is my biology. Now, it's not to say that biology isn't a very important factor that distinguishes some of the experiences of womanhood from, a cis person to a trans person. Of course it is. But there's more to womanhood than just the biology. And yeah, I just don't, I find that to be, it seems to me they're a victim of the same patriarchy that they're claiming to want to undermine and fight against. But by holding to these very strict, reductive notions of womanhood. As far as the sports conversation, what do you guys think of, the whole like Leah Thomas thing, for example? You can go first, Ava.
I'd much rather hear what Artemis has to say.
Sure.
I've done so much talking.
Huh?
I've done so much talking.
I know, but here's the thing about the sports issue. I'm not really well read up on it. And I honestly got kind of tired of hearing about it.
Sure.
But I'm sure Artemis could say something that will like jog my memory of something.
Yeah, I normally when it comes up, I'm usually with my friend Demi, and so she usually takes this reins. But I will talk a little bit about what I can. So I follow the science, and what the science is saying is that after 2 years of HRT, that we're seeing these biological advantages diminish to the point to where there is no outward like over domination, over advantage. And a lot of people bring up a lot of very specific things. And I think the one thing people forget though is that we are not talking about people who are your average Jane and Joe. These are people who are at the top 1% of athleticism that are already abnormal in their athleticism. Like Michael Phelps, what is abnormal? His biological advantages made him almost impossible to beat, from the webbing between his toes and feet and hands, to his larger wingspan, to his lung capacity. I'm forgetting one more thing about him, but he had advantages to make him the perfect swimmer. If he had played basketball, he wouldn't have been as good. What I want to see going forward is that I think we also have to recognize that if trans women were dominating in sports, we would be seeing them winning in every category, and we don't.
Exactly. I'm sorry. That is something I wanted to. That is actually something I was thinking too, because they said that trans women are dominating. Well, if they're dominating so much, why do they lose so much? Like we wouldn't expect them to lose as frequently as they do, but they do. So it's not the case that they're dominating.
And the thing about I want to add one more thing real quick. The thing about Leah Thomas I find very fascinating. This is what a lot of conservatives don't either know or they don't want to point out. So people say, well, Leah Thomas was ranked 400th in men's, and so she transferred over to women so she could win. Leah Thomas was actually in the top 10 to the 2 years prior in a couple different categories. I can bring them up on swimming.org if you want me to. I'm trying to pull up all my sources. She was actually very highly ranked in the men's category. What we saw is when she dropped to 400th, and this shows the effects of HRT, in my opinion, was because she had started HRT and the dramatic changes that had had on her body dropped her to the 400th place mark. But no one wants to talk about that. They want to talk about the year before, and I'm like, well, no, duh. She was on HRT. She wasn't going to perform at her highest caliber in the men's category.
So it's a complete spinning of the facts to try to fit their own narrative. And what they also fail to point out is that they'll say, oh, well, you know, she's taking away opportunities from cis women. But hold on a second, like, are you expecting then a trans woman never to win anything? That is your ideal world? Because the reality is that she's also lost to cis women. So if your expectation is for a trans woman to never win anything, then you're just being unfair to, you know, towards the trans woman. And you also would have to show that the reason why they won is because they're trans. And then how do you make up for the fact that then she's also lost against cis women? Like, either there is this inherent insurmountable advantage or there isn't. And if there isn't, you would expect somebody to win some, lose some, and have that be the dynamic. So again, I think it's a smokescreen.
Yeah, I have those numbers real quick. Let me cite that just so I can be completely consistent. So in her freshman year, she was the 6th fastest time in the men's 1,000 freestyle. She was also ranked number 49 in men's 1650 and 98 men's 500. And then when you go to her sophomore year, she was ranked number 2 in the Ivy League men's 500, 1,000, and 1650 freestyle. So she was at the top. No one wants to talk about that.
Right.
That's usswimming.org that you can find that on.
Yeah, anybody listening to this conversation should definitely look these things up, because again, one thing that I find concerning is the way in which the media spins this information. That a lot of people are just getting the wrong information from the wrong sources in the wrong context. What do you think is the reason why there's so much opposition in, like, is it just like an upholding of the patriarchy from the conservative side that they want to hold down to these views? Like, is that what it is? I don't know.
Was that for me?
For anybody, for both of you, yeah.
I'm sorry.
The question was, why do you think that there's so much propaganda out there? Like, what are the conservatives gaining by spreading this misinformation on these issues?
Well, I mean, I would just say that this is par for the course for conservatives. Like, this is what they've been doing. Like, they did it with, like, they did the same thing with women, black people, gay people. I think the reason why they're targeting trans people now is because they don't have any actual, like, policies that will actually help ameliorate any of the problems that society is facing.
Sure.
They like, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I'm trying to get my thoughts together. I haven't slept much.
Oh, I know what it's like.
I pulled an all-nighter.
Yeah, that's rough.
But yeah, I would say that it's because they don't have any, like, actual, like, useful policies.
Maybe
like, they're not addressing, like, climate change, like, effectively. You know, most of them deny it. You know.
yeah, they just want to focus on things that shouldn't matter.
Yeah. They just want to focus on, like, maintaining, like, their power.
What about
So,
this idea that, like, we're going after kids and trying to, like, have children go through dangerous medication and sterilization and surgeries and that kind of thing? Because
yeah, none of that's actually happening.
right.
Like, when they hear gender affirming care and they think that we want to take, like, a 4-year-old and give them bottom surgery, right? But no one in their right mind, no one in their right mind advocates for that, right? I'm sorry.
Well,
go on.
No, I was gonna say really quickly. I think one of the things I want people to understand is that it's a red herring. It's never about the kids. It's never about what they're saying it is. So I want to point the fact out that I want everyone to think back when Roe versus Wade got overturned. That was monumental in the United States. That impacted worldwide because nobody in the world thought that we would see that in America. And if you look at the trajectory for them, because up to that point, that was the fight of Republicans. That was the big fight. We've got to ban abortion, ban, 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 ban. These are horrible people, da, 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 da. And we saw similar things coming into play before the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is the bounties put out in Texas, or the limitation, like the heartbeat bills, things like that. We saw small laws come into play where states could do these things before federal stepped in. We are seeing the same thing with what's happening with trans people. And it blows my mind. But Republicans, instead of focusing on what they need to focus on, which is actually bettering our country, even with conservative viewpoints, like lowering the deficit, helping out with homeless issues, healthcare, things like that, where citizens genuinely need this, they like to create a villain. And their villain, it's a scapegoat. Trans people are the problem. Trans people are the downfall of this country. Trans people are making the world terrible. It's trans people, trans people, trans people. 5 years ago, it was mothers who seek abortion are terrible people. Abortions are the downfall of our country. Look at how horrible we are. No, they don't want to focus on the big issues because they know that people are going to disagree in many ways. But it's super easy to take a topic like trans people are after your kids and everyone go, yeah, that's wrong, because there's already an uncomfortability around trans people. This is literally policymakers trying to tell you as a person what you should care about when you know there are bigger issues in America than if a trans kid is competing in a sports track meet. Like, we know there are bigger issues.
I want to add to that, because I find this talking point of claiming to care about kids and protecting kids for the most part to be complete bullshit. These are the same people that are then also against any kind of proper sexual education, because they say, "Oh, this is inappropriate for kids." If I had proper sex education growing up, if concept of gender had been explained to me in the right way, it would have saved me decades of discomfort and confusion and uncertainty. And so they don't give a fuck about protecting kids. They don't care about protecting kids. They're
Absolutely.
it just makes me crazy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. See, it's like, what's ironic is that we're the ones who want to let kids be kids.
Yeah.
Like, we're the ones who actually want to let kids be kids. You know, I say, if a kid is cisgender, let them be cisgender. If a kid is transgender, let them be transgender. Let them explore themselves. You know, let them learn about themselves. Like, let them learn about who they are. Let them learn about other people like them. You know, cisgender people get to learn about other cisgender people. Then transgender children. So if cisgender children should deserve, like, have the right to learn about, like, other cisgender people, like, trans children should learn about, like, other, like, the existence of other trans people.
And I
You
always
know?
ask, like, what is the harm in more education, right? And then they want to say, oh, well, it can lead to confusion. And again, it's like the whole idea that, like, you can somehow be turned gay or be turned trans just by learning that these people exist and that these concepts exist. It's just fear mongering. You know, and proper education does not lead to confusion; it leads to clarity.
Right.
Like I would like the confusion thing always makes me interested. So like, school is literally the perfect place for you to ask questions to get rid of that confusion. Like, if I'm sitting, like when I was sitting like my first biology classes and I'm confused on like the difference between mitosis and meiosis, and I go, I'm confused. So the teacher go, oh, well, kids, that's it. Someone's confused. We must stop teaching this. Like, the school is the perfect place. And I think that one of the things I do agree with is we need to advocate for teachers to be more prepared and have people who are specialists like on campuses that can talk to students about these things. I don't just want some, teacher that's been there for freaking 50 years to just like tell Sally or Joe who they think they are and things like that. And that goes both ways. If a child is cis and they're asking questions, they go, oh no, you're probably trans. Or a trans kid wanting to ask questions, they go, no, you're just cis, like, get over yourself. Like, that goes both ways. But I think that, and this is honestly, like, y'all need to understand, this is how the Republican Party has been working for a while. It's directly working. I say the American propaganda machine works perfectly, because unless you recognize what it's doing, you fall victim to it every time. It's about control. It's about manipulation. You keep people ignorant. You keep people like in a sense of non-diversity, a lack of diversity, meaning they don't get to experience other cultures, other people, other things. And so people become, they push those things away because they're like, that's not my life. That's not my culture. Like the whole thing, there's only two genders. Cool. In Western culture, we can recognize there's usually been two, but there's more. But how dare you, we're going to tell someone who's male-y that they only have two genders? That's not your culture. It's a level of ignorance and like entitlement. It blows my mind.
Yeah, and just to kind of go off of that, like you said, it's like a propaganda machine, and it's a really dangerous one. And I find it drives me crazy because it's an attempt to virtue signal, like, oh, we care about the kids, when in reality it's no, you are uncomfortable by what you don't understand, and you're too immature to educate yourself about it, and then you want to harm the rest of society with your bigotry. Now it's one thing to like be, like, okay, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this here. You said something that I wanted to address. These things could be taught incorrectly. Like, I'm sure there, for example, I've heard of situations where teachers are saying, "Oh, so and so was born is a boy but likes to wear dresses. They must be trans." That's not that's dangerous as well.
Yeah.
Like that's not the solution to navigating that problem. Is not let's get rid of gender education altogether. It's let's teach this stuff properly. It's let's correct the mistakes of these individuals that are in these positions, and make them prepared to actually teach this stuff correctly. And that's the thing. It's like this is the other hypocrisy. Conservatives want to talk about freedom, and then they want to burn books. They want to restrict speech. They want to restrict education. It's a constant state of contradiction that that party exists in.
Well, it's also they also like to throw around parental rights a lot. Yeah. And my whole thing about that is it's that I'm hearing a lot of, I want to parent your kids, but don't parent mine. Like if like they're coming for like the whole leave the kids alone. Nobody wants your kid. No one wants your, and I say this as a bisexual woman. I wouldn't want my child to be trans. I would want my child to be a part of the LGBTQ, not because I wouldn't love them, but because I know the struggles they would face going through that. I would love them regardless of who they were or who they are. But I don't want them to go through these struggles, which is why I fight so hard, because I don't want our youth to be having these same conversations 50 years later. I want us to move forward. We get like 10 steps forward and then we take 20 steps back. It seems like we just can't get there. But the whole parental rights thing is it's like yay for me, no for you. It's like banning gender affirming care is not affecting cis kids. It's not affecting parents of kids that aren't trans. It's not affecting them. But what it is affecting is good parents following WPATH in the United States, going to doctors, going through the steps, trying to make sure that their child is loved, taken care of, and supported. That is who it's affecting. It's like I don't understand this concept. Like, first of all, also we pay for healthcare in America. I find it interesting that we are banning stuff that we pay for. Like when I pay for my health insurance, I expect that I can get healthcare for the things that I need to get care for. And now we're banning that. I could see an argument being made if we had universal health care, but we don't. This is privatized healthcare, and we're banning access to elements of privatized healthcare. That's very strange to me. And I wish people would recognize that no one wants your kid, Dan. No one wants your kid, Kyle. Like, your kid's fine. This isn't about you. It's about Sally, who might be Sam. Like, that's who it's about. So yeah, it's the ridiculousness. I hate hypocrisy.
One reason why I asked both of you to be on here is to also point out another talking point that I deal with on a daily basis is I'll have these conversations and I'll be told, well, you are a male, and so you don't get to have a say in what womanhood is. You are masculine, therefore you can't possibly be trans or non-binary. You don't get to talk about what is or isn't trans. Now, when I point to the fact that my views on these things have been shaped by cis women and trans people, and who disagree with them, they'll say, well, just because you have friends that see things this way doesn't mean that they're right. But meanwhile, they're trying to justify their position, saying, well, this is my experience. Okay, well, other cis women and other trans people have different experiences than you, believe differently than you, and you think that your experience, just because you believe what you believe, somehow trumps that of anybody else. It's a narcissism that drives me fucking crazy. And I want to address, and I want to ask both of you, kind of shifting gears slightly, the concept of non-binary, because I see a lot of infighting within the trans community about the existence of non-binary people. And my understanding and how I've defined what it means to be trans is to have an incongruence with your sex. That exists on a spectrum. It's not just, say, an incongruence with your genitals, it's also an incongruence with sexual characteristics. And so as a non-binary person, you can have that incongruence and have that play out in a different way than what a trans man or a trans woman would experience the need to fully transition to the opposite gender, right? Someone like myself, who for those who don't know, I do think of myself as non-binary. The way that I navigate my incongruence exists somewhere in between. That is where I feel the most comfortable. That is where the anxiety and discomfort and issues psychologically that I experience with my sex are best mediated, is existing in that middle ground. And I get trans women on TikTok or social media say things like, pick a side, saying things like, you're not really trans, you're just, a guy who has a fetish, things of that nature. And I find it so hypocritical. And I think it comes, and I want to know what you think about this, but I think it comes from a lot of self-hate, where they think that they're unhappy with themselves. They don't like the idea of somebody who might be trans on a different spectrum, not having gone through their exact experience and their exact suffering. And they think that if they just align themselves with the bigots who ultimately will not accept them, will continue to reject them, they'll be picked as the good ones. Like, the people like, well, I don't even want to mention them by name because they're not worth it. But I don't know. Well, what do you guys think about that?
Can I start first, and then
Yeah.
I want Ava to go, because I want to say two things. So I'm going to talk about what you said, but I want to give an example of, I think, where this internalized issue comes from. So I am bisexual, and as y'all know, pansexuality exists. I know far more pansexual people than I do bisexual people, and there is an issue that these two sexualities deal with a lot, because people think they're the same thing. And one of the things that I had to fight against internally was when people wanted to bring the P and put it into the acronym for representation. I had to deal with why that upset me, because it's under the umbrella of bisexual. There's a crap ton of sexualities under bisexual. I'm just the big umbrella, which is attraction to more than two genders or sexes. That's it. Pansexuals, regardless of gender. I had to deal with why I was recognizing, because I felt like it was erasure, because everybody around me was pan and I'm the only bi person. But what I had to recognize is that, first of all, there's a misunderstanding about bisexuality, which I strive to educate people on, that bisexual people are not supposed to exclude transgender people or non-binary people from the dating pool, that bisexuality is about preference, is that a pansexual person doesn't have a preference. My preference is people who are more masculine presenting and male genitalia. Doesn't mean I won't go for a very beautiful lady like the one below me. It just means that's my preference. And I try to educate on that, but I had to deal with my internalized issues of why sometimes some people want to separate the P. And I recognize that I think that we shouldn't separate the P, because every sexuality is valid under bisexuality. We are all one. We all express it differently, and we should all love each other and support each other. Going to what you said, I've talked to several trans women about this, and what I've noticed is I think it's societally based. I think that because society has passing privilege. And the issue is that trans men and trans women, unlike non-binary people, are held to a higher standard than cis women and cis men on how they are to look in public. A trans woman must be hyper feminine, have long hair, will always wear makeup, feminization on the face, breasts, have the bottom surgery, be skinny, be fit, be perfect, be a doll. Same thing for men. They must, trans men must be, have muscles, facial hair, have define this, the characteristics of like the manliest man. These are the standards that society holds trans people to above cis people. And so I think what happens is that when non-binary people don't have to be held to those standards, there's an internalized sense of a frustration of like, well, why can't I just be like that? Why do I have to be up this hyper feminine or high masculine presentation? I don't want to have to do that. I'm trans. Why do I have to go to these links to be considered a woman or a man? I think that's where it stems from. I've had a few trans women agree with me on this, and trans men, that it is the societal pressures on trans binary people that has caused this infighting with non-binary.
Go ahead, Eva.
Sorry. Yeah. Like with respect to what these terms like are referring to, like when we say like trans, non-binary. So you said that trans is you would define trans as having like an incongruence with your sex, right?
Yes.
So like I want to know what you think of this definition, like incorporating that aspect. That being trans is just to have to identify as a gender that does not align with the sex you were assigned at birth as a result of the incongruence.
Yeah.
With your sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the case. The non-binary people would fall under that definition, because it's not the case that non-binary people identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth.
But they're stuck in this narrative that the gender is binary, that there is only one or the other. And so they're like, well, non-binary isn't a gender according to their view. I mean,
Right.
I had somebody basically say, well, you don't appear feminine in any of your TikTok videos, so you're just pretending, looking for attention. Like I owe anybody a gender expression. Like I owe them an expression of femininity. It's
Right.
like I don't owe you shit. You know. So it's just crazy.
Exactly, because they don't look. Hold on. I'm sorry. Wait.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, because they don't understand the distinction between gender identity, gender expression, gender roles, right? These aren't all synonymous. These aren't all interchangeable. Just because someone has a particular gender identity does not mean that they're going to always express themselves like in like the stereotypical like way that society would expect them to present themselves. A person who identifies as a man could still have a gender expression that's more feminine. You know, a non-binary person who is a non-binary person who is may have a more feminine expression or more feminine presentation, or they may have a more masculine presentation, right? But that doesn't negate or refute like their internal sense of self, right? Or like their desire to be perceived and respected as a non-binary individual.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing, like the entitlement of I see this as partially a reaction to the recognition they're losing power in society, that they want to hold on to being the oppressors, and also the fact that there are cases where the oppressed in their hypocrisy want to know what it's like to become the oppressor. The trans women that are attacking me as being non-binary just want to know what it's like to just shit on the next category, and I just find it really hypocritical.
Oh, actually I had a thought. So non-binary people are not cisgender, right? If they were cisgender, they would not be non-binary. Non-binary people identify with a gender that is not, at least with one gender that is not aligned with the sex they were assigned at birth, right? So under that definition, they would fall under the trans umbrella, right? But there are many, but there's several, at least there's several non-binary people who do not identify as trans, right? They say that they're just non-binary. They do not use the trans label. So Like, do you think like the way that like I'm defining non-binary or like, this definition of non-binary, like, do you think this like excludes those people like unfairly or like doesn't take them into consideration?
I wouldn't know what they would be meaning when they say that they're non-binary but not trans. Like, for me,
Right.
I've said this before. I don't believe language possesses correctness. So people can
Okay.
use the same term to mean different things.
Right.
I'm not going to say if somebody is calling themselves non-binary, I'm not going to say you're just wrong because you're not using my definition. What I would say is, generally speaking, we tend to use the same words for utility, but just tell me what it is that you mean, how you're using it, because all I would say is how they're using it and how I'm using it. So we're just talking about different concepts. I don't know what it means to say you're non-binary but not trans. Like, I don't know what
Right.
that is
I think the
expressing.
idea is that like what there's I think I don't want to speak for them necessarily, but I think the idea is that they don't view them like when they think trans, they think of someone who's like, who identifies as like the opposite genders, like um a person who is assigned male at birth, like identifying like as a woman, right?
Right.
Or a person who is assigned female at birth,
But it's a
identifying.
reductive way of looking at the trans definition.
Wait, what?
That is a reductive way of looking at the trans definition, trans
Right,
category.
and I don't want to say that that's how like non-binary people who say they aren't trans or don't label themselves as trans. I don't want to say like that's exactly what they're saying, but
They
like
might
it's
also just be
just
gender non-conforming. They might just say, I don't have a feeling of an incongruence, but I don't feel the need to conform to particular expressions of gender or stereotypes of gender.
right.
Maybe something like that.
Right, that could be the case. Yeah.
Yeah. I would, I would have to, talk to one of them
Hmm.
specifically about how they're using it.
I mean, I will
Um,
say there is a couple of studies that are supposed to be coming out the next year or so that look at the brain development of non-binary people. One of the things, and I was posting a few more links in my link tree, is that so mosaic brain is something I mentioned before. We kind of have an understanding of it, and when I talk about my discussions, when I talk about the hypothalamus, is the hypothalamus is not the end all be all. That is merely one thing that we've been able to point to that shows about gender, that shows about identity. There are dozens of others. And the way to basically look at this is bimodal once again. There is no one with an all male brain or an all female brain. We all have such unique brain structures within each of us. So there's the typical male end, typical female end, and then all the overlap. And so there is each person's brain, you can have female typical, male typical, and then you have the overlap. And I think and a lot of people try to go in absolutes, but a trans person, their brain, along with the hypothalamus in it, is comprised, is constructed to be, if they are born female, it's going to be constructed to be male, vice versa. That's why we talk about the brain development's different from the body development, that your genitalia is not defining your brain structure. We're still breaking this down, but the thing is that because it's so complex, like we just mapped the hypothalamus, and now we're trying to hit all these other areas. And there's a few studies that go into it, but it shows that everybody's brains are going to be mapped differently. Typically, male brains are going to lean to more typical male mapping. Typically, females' brains are going to lean more to typical female mapping, but you are going to have a lot of people that are that in between. And that is where transgender people, I say trans-binary and trans-non-binary. I think the term trans, I've talked to a few non-binary people that say they are not trans. My whole thing is I think it comes from the fact of what people think trans means and that there's a negative connotation to it. I think that honestly, like, if your gender is not aligning with your sex assigned at birth, that does make you trans. That doesn't mean that you have to. Now, here's the thing, right? Like when I talk about cis and trans, that doesn't mean you have to say that's who you are. That is something that you are classified as, but you don't have to go, hi, by the way, I'm trans. Like, you don't have to go around doing that. You can just say what your gender is and move on about your day. It's just helpful sometimes in discussions where it's like if it's a cis and trans discussion. I mean, I think I always crack up at the whole like cis is so new. Like I even put in my Discord now the evidence that it was documented in 1914. The cis and trans used to explain gender expression and things like that by Hertzfeld and Burkhardt. hold on, I have his name right here. Give me a second.
Just to add to that, like I hear so much fear mongering from the
Sure.
other side when they say things like, "Oh, the people that did gender studies or where these like horrible individuals, psychopaths, like trying to violate human rights and these monsters and all these things." And it's like, look, even if there are individuals that may have done things that we could all agree are horrible, it doesn't make gender and ideology trying to corrupt your children. Like there are a lot of people in history that have done things that have helped the sciences, but also things that were horrific and were horrible people. Doesn't mean that we, throw out an entire field because of some individual. It's fear mongering. It's just intellectual dishonesty. But okay, if anybody in the audience has any questions before we wrap this up, I don't know if either of you want to add anything else to the conversation.
Yeah, I would just I wanted to add on a little bit to that just like if people are going to say, oh, well, this horrible individual, which by the way, he wasn't the doctor they always bring up, he wasn't the first one. But I hope that they hold the same energy for how we got to where we are with women's reproductive health and the atrocities occur with that. And I hope they also hold that energy for Henrietta Lacks. If you don't know who Henrietta Lacks is, her DNA and cells have been used to create the polio vaccine, genetic mapping, and even the COVID-19 vaccines. Her DNA was taken without consent. It has continuously been used to help further science. And her family and her were never, ever given acknowledgement or consideration for this. There are atrocities that have occurred in science and medicine to get us to where we are. But I think what we have to go is, do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do we throw out everything we've learned with that? Or do we acknowledge our mistakes and go, we won't do that again? Right. I think that's where we need to go forward with this.
Absolutely.
I will say, just kind of to add on, at the end of the day, I think my goal when talking in these conversations is to get people to recognize that trans people are who they say they are. When Ava tells me that she's a woman, I believe Ava is a woman because that's who she tells me that she is. When I say I am a woman, I want people to believe that I am a woman because that's who I say I am. And you sound really creepy when you're like, well, what's in your pants? Like, I have never seen so many cis people obsessed with genitalia in my life. Like, it is beyond me the amount of times people go, well, what's in your pants? You can't always tell. And honestly, it's none of your damn business. Let people live their lives. I don't understand. Trans people are hurting you. Don't get it.
Yeah. Okay, I remember what I was gonna say now. The question, like this gotcha question, what is a woman? Conservatives love asking this question. It's something that, Matt Walsh made the whole focus of a quote unquote documentary, right? But what most people don't know, what a lot of people don't know, is that the question, what is a woman, is actually a question that was being debated seriously in continental philosophy. Especially amongst early 20th century, 19th and 20th century philosophers like Simone de Beauvoir, who argued that the distinction between a man and a woman is that one man is in society, man is considered to be the essential being, and woman is considered to be the other. Right? So I don't really know too much about continental philosophy. I don't really know too much about de Beauvoir's views.
I love de Beauvoir.
Yeah. But I find that historical debate very interesting, right? And it was an actual serious metaphysical debate, inquiring what it means to be a woman, right? So going back to I'm sorry if I say too much, but going back to the view I was describing earlier, it's going back to the view I was describing earlier, it's referred to as resemblance nominalism within gender metaphysics. I said that woman, like the idea is that woman is a cluster concept, right? In the same way like games are, right? When you think of game, right, you can think of various games, right? Like none of which are like the other, right? I can name like chess, hopscotch, Call of Duty, Go, like these different games, right? They're all distinct from one another, right? They all rely on like they all require like various like levels of skill, luck, childhood, like endurance, right? But they all instantiate all like different features within the cluster concept of what we call a game, the class game, right? And that's why so they have a resemblance relation, right? And that's why we refer to these all as games, right? They're not all instantiating like the same like features, right? They're not no single game is instantiating every single feature we associate with a game, right? It's the same case with a woman. No woman is going to instantiate every single feature that's associated with womanness, right? Because all these features, like that's going to include features that uh from that are associated with womanness, varying from like culture to culture, time period from one time period to another. So what Artemis said is that we should believe people like when they tell us the gender that they are, right? And I think that I would argue that at the very least, a woman is just someone who identifies as a woman and has a desire, like has this desirous state to be perceived by society as a woman, right? And I think the desire component is very important because, as we both know, I don't know if I brought this up already, but as we both know, there are many cisgender women who get quote unquote plucked, right? They will they're cisgender women who have been like attacked or kicked out of a woman's restroom because people thought that they were a man, right? But it's not the case that those women desired to be perceived as a man, right? They desired to be perceived as a woman, right? They want to be perceived as a woman. So I think like the desire component is very very important because I don't think like everyone needs to perceive you as a woman in order for you to be a woman. I think that as long as you have that desire component, that's a major factor that needs to be taken
Yeah.
into consideration. Yep.
I
Yeah,
found what I was
absolutely.
looking for. I found something I was looking for. I want to read. So, because what you referenced, the historical thing, it triggered a memory. So, this is dealing with Aquinas, which I know both of you are familiar with. Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas. Basically, Simone de Beauvoir begins her analysis by asking why and for how long women have been regarded as inferior to men. De Beauvoir argues that historical events have led to women being subjugated as weaker by the stronger, a role taken on by men, which can be traced back to the work of Thomas Aquinas, in which he referred to women as imperfect men based on a false inspection of anatomy. As a result, humanity is male and man defines woman not in herself but as relative to him. And consequently, women are shunned into the role of the other, whereas men are consequently named as both the positive and neutral terms for humans. De Beauvoir states that although there are biological differences between the sexes, women only become women because of the circumstances of their society, leading her to the conclusion that the facts of biology take on the values of social norms. Therefore, it is not nature that defines women, rather she defines herself by dealing with nature on her own account and emotional life. That, to me, is what defines a woman, is how she interacts in society and how she
Right.
yeah. That
She
is
was
that
so
is
far
my
ahead of
comment.
her time, like with her
Mhm.
work. I love
I
her
agree.
work. She's one of the most underrated philosophers of all time. Yeah. So, well, I want to say thank you so much, both of you, for coming on here and sharing your knowledge about these issues. I'm gonna have this be one of those videos that like I tell people to go watch whenever they spout their nonsense. Say this will educate you on what these things mean and what the reality of the
Okay.
situation is.
Yeah. I
Um,
I apologize for like not being like super prepared.
no, you're good. You're
Um,
fine.
and
Uh,
thank you for having me, by the way.
anytime, sure. I would love
Yeah,
to have
thanks for
both of
having
you
me as
back,
well.
of course.
Yeah.
And I would definitely would love to have both of you back on sometime in the future.
Most
Um,
definitely.
yeah. So for those listening, thank you for spending time with us tonight, and we'll be back sometime next week with our episode of Axioms and Trials. So I hope everybody has a safe night.
Thank you so